The ice doesn't forget. I learned that truth during my third winter at McMurdo Station, when the wind carved words into the glaciers and the darkness lasted 4 months straight. My name is Dr. Abraham Wolf, and for 17 years, I served as Chief Medical Officer for the United States Antarctic Program. I treated frostbite, monitored psychological deterioration, and documented the slow erosion of sanity that comes from living at the bottom of the world. But nothing in my training prepared me for February 14th, 1987. The call came at 0400 hours. A joint military scientific drilling operation near the Ellsworth Mountains had broken through into something they were calling a thermal anomaly. The temperature readings made no sense. A pocket of liquid water 3 kilometers below the ice, heated by geothermal vents that shouldn't exist in that geological formation. The team had deployed a remote camera. What the camera found wasn't water. When I arrived by helicopter 6 hours later, the drill site looked like a war zone. Generators screamed against the wind. Floodlights turned the ice into a stage for shadows that shouldn't move the way they moved. I counted 14 personnel, geologists, engineers, 2 Navy SEALs, and a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself only as Mitchell from Washington. He led me to the command tent without small talk. Inside, a bank of monitors displayed feeds from the drilling shaft. Most showed static. One showed movement, slow, deliberate, organic movement in a space that had been sealed beneath 3 kilometers of ice for what the geologists estimated was 15,000 years. "We need you to tell us if it's alive," Mitchell said. I stared at the screen. The shape was roughly humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but the proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the torso too narrow. It moved through the subterranean chamber with fluid grace, touching the walls with what looked like curiosity. "Define alive," I said. Mitchell's expression didn't change. "Breathing, conscious, capable of communication." "Communication about what?" He handed me a folder stamped with classifications I'd never seen before. Inside were satellite photographs, seismic data, and a single-type sentence that made my hands go cold. Subject has demonstrated knowledge of Cold War nuclear deployment sites with 87% accuracy. My routine at McMurdo had always been predictable. Morning rounds at 0700, equipment checks, weekly psychological evaluations for the winter overcrew. I'd grown accustomed to the peculiar rhythm of Antarctic life, the way time compressed in the darkness, how conversations became sparse and precise, the strange intimacy that develops among people who know they can't leave. I'd signed up for this isolation deliberately. After my divorce and the custody battle that followed, the idea of spending months in a place where no lawyers could reach me held genuine appeal. My daughter Emily was safe with her mother in Seattle. I sent letters every week, though I knew they wouldn't arrive until the supply ship came in October. The Antarctic taught you to work with what you had. My medical bay was state-of-the-art for a remote facility, surgical suite, laboratory, imaging equipment, and enough pharmaceutical supplies to handle everything from appendicitis to psychotic breaks. I'd performed 3 emergency surgeries during my tenure, delivered 1 baby against all protocols, and talked 6 people down from hypothermic delusions. But this was different. The drilling operation had been classified from the start. I'd noticed the additional military presence 3 months earlier, personnel rotations that didn't match the usual scientific schedules, equipment shipments with blacked-out manifests. The official story was deep ice core sampling for climate research. The truth, I now understood, was something else entirely. Mitchell's briefing lasted 2 hours. The thermal anomaly had been detected by a military satellite conducting routine surveillance. The temperature signature suggested artificial heating. When ground-penetrating radar mapped the space, they found architectural structures, chambers, corridors, what looked disturbingly like living quarters. "And we thought it was a Soviet installation," Mitchell said, spreading geological surveys across the table. "A secret base beneath the ice, close enough to monitor our operations, but deep enough to avoid detection." "But it's not Soviet," I said. "No." The first drilling team had broken through on February 10th. They'd lowered cameras, acoustic sensors, air quality monitors. The chamber was pressurized, not with Earth's atmospheric composition, but close enough that the readings made sense. Oxygen, nitrogen, trace gases, temperature holding steady at 18 degrees Celsius. Then something moved in front of the camera. The initial footage was grainy, distorted by electromagnetic interference that the engineers couldn't explain. But the shape was unmistakable, bipedal, deliberate, approximately 2.3 meters tall. It approached the camera, examined it with what appeared to be long, articulated fingers, then retreated into the darkness. "We sent down a microphone," Mitchell continued. "We wanted to see if it would respond to sound." He played the recording. Static, then a voice, if you could call it that. The sounds were structured, patterned, almost musical. My mind tried to find language in it, tried to parse meaning from the intonation. "Our linguists have been analyzing it for 3 days, Mitchell said. "They identified fragments of Russian, English, German, and something else they can't classify. How is that possible? We don't know. But 2 days ago, it started broadcasting coordinates." He showed me the data. Latitude and longitude pairs, delivered in precise numerical sequences. The linguists had plotted them on maps. Every single coordinate corresponded to a Cold War-era military installation, ICBM silos in Montana, submarine bases in Scotland, radar stations in Greenland, nuclear storage facilities in Kazakhstan, sites that were still classified. Sites that shouldn't appear on any map accessible to civilians, or even most military personnel. It knows things it shouldn't know, Mitchell said quietly, and we need to understand how, and why, and what else it might know. I looked at him across the table at the hard lines of his face and the exhaustion in his eyes. You want me to make medical contact? You're a doctor. You've worked in extreme conditions. You understand isolation and communication barriers. He paused. And according to your file, you have the highest psychological stability rating of anyone currently on the continent. My file? We've been monitoring station personnel for months. This operation was always going to require medical support. You were always the first choice. I thought about Emily, about the letters I'd written but hadn't sent yet, about the promise I'd made to myself that this tour would be my last. The Antarctic had given me distance from my failures, but it had also taught me something about responsibility, about what you owe to the people who depend on you, even when you didn't choose that dependency. What if it's dangerous? I asked. Then you'll have 2 Navy SEALs with you at all times, and we extract immediately at the first sign of threat. And if it's not dangerous? If it just wants to be left alone? Mitchell's expression hardened. That's not an option. Something has been living beneath our feet, watching us, gathering intelligence on our most sensitive military assets. We need to know what it is, where it came from, and what it wants. Or we seal the chamber and let the ice reclaim it. I looked at the monitors again, at the shadow moving through spaces that hadn't seen light in millennia. I thought about the loneliness of being the last of your kind, trapped beneath an ocean of ice, listening to the sounds of a world you couldn't reach. I thought about what Emily would want me to do. I'll need to review the medical protocols for contamination, I said, and I want full autonomy over the medical aspects of contact. No interference from Washington unless I request it. Mitchell nodded. Agreed. When do we descend? Tomorrow at 600. We've constructed a pressurized elevator shaft. The descent takes 40 minutes. He stood, gathering his files. Get some rest, Doctor. You're about to meet something that shouldn't exist. After he left, I sat alone with the monitors, watching the figure move through its prison of ice, and I wondered what secrets are worth keeping, and what truths are too dangerous to leave buried. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in my quarters listening to the wind test the walls, thinking about first contact and what it meant to be the bridge between 2 forms of consciousness that had evolved in entirely different contexts. My medical training had prepared me for trauma, disease, psychological crisis, the predictable failures of human biology. But how do you diagnose something that isn't human? How do you establish trust with intelligence that might perceive reality in fundamentally different ways? I'd brought 3 books with me to Antarctica: The Origin of Species, Pale Blue Dot, and a worn copy of The Little Prince that Emily had insisted I take. I reread the passage about the fox and taming, about how relationships require time and ritual and patience. At 500, I gave up on sleep and began my preparations. The contamination protocols were extensive: full biocontainment suit with independent oxygen supply, decontamination procedures before and after contact, blood tests, viral panels, radiation monitoring. Mitchell's team had established a medical quarantine module adjacent to the elevator shaft. If I showed any signs of infection or biological contamination, I'd be isolated for a minimum of 30 days. I packed my medical kit, diagnostic equipment, sedatives, though I had no idea if Earth-based pharmaceuticals would have any effect, antibiotics, wound care supplies. I added a notebook and pencil. Something about bringing paper felt important, a gesture toward documentation that wasn't purely digital, that carried the weight of physical record. The drilling site was fully operational by the time I arrived. The elevator shaft had been reinforced with steel plating, pressurized to match the atmospheric conditions in the chamber below. The engineers had installed lighting rigs every 100 meters, small islands of illumination in 3 kilometers of darkness. Commander James Torres briefed me on safety protocols. He was one of the Navy SEALs, compact, efficient, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd made peace with death long ago. His partner, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, checked my biocontainment suit with methodical precision. "We'll maintain position 15 meters behind you at all times," Torres said. You'll have a live audio feed to the surface. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you signal and we extract immediately. Understood? Understood. Mitchell appeared with a metal case. Inside was a tablet loaded with translation software. Basic mathematical symbols, pictographic communication tools. The linguists had also prepared audio files, greetings in 17 languages, musical tones, even whale songs. "Start with observation," Mitchell instructed. "Let it become accustomed to your presence. Don't force interaction." "What if it forces interaction with me?" "Then adapt." He paused. "We've been monitoring its behavior for 72 hours. It follows patterns, moves through the same spaces at regular intervals, seems to spend significant time near what we think is a data storage system. It hasn't shown aggression, but it also hasn't shown fear. Maybe it doesn't perceive us as a threat," I said. "Or maybe it knows something we don't." The elevator descent began at 0630. The shaft was narrow. barely wide enough for 3 people standing shoulder to shoulder. The walls were smooth ice, ancient and compressed, holding trapped air bubbles that were old when humans first walked upright. Through the transparent sections, I could see layers of geological time, volcanic ash from eruptions that had reshaped continents, dust from meteor impacts, the chemical signatures of climate shifts that had ended entire epochs. Torres and Kim stood silent. Their weapons were holstered but accessible. 9mm sidearms, and I noticed something that looked like a high-voltage taser modified for extreme cold. The descent took 37 minutes. My ears popped twice as we dropped through pressure gradients. The temperature inside the elevator remained stable, but I could feel the weight of the ice above us. 3,000 meters of frozen water, pressing down with the patience of deep time. At 2,147 meters, the elevator slowed. Through the reinforced window, I saw the chamber open below us, a vast space carved from living rock, walls smooth as polished glass. The architecture was impossible, angles that shouldn't support weight, curved surfaces that seemed to shift in the lighting. It reminded me of pictures I'd seen of Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, but older, stranger, designed according to geometric principles that didn't quite match Euclidean space. The elevator settled with a soft, pneumatic hiss. Torres checked his weapon. Kim activated her helmet camera. I took a breath that tasted like recycled air and medical-grade anxiety. The door opened. The chamber was warmer than I'd expected, not the killing cold of the surface, but a mild, almost comfortable temperature that suggested active climate control. The lighting came from the walls themselves, a soft bioluminescent glow that pulsed with slow rhythm like breathing. And there, 30 meters away, standing beside what looked like a control panel embedded in the stone, was the being they'd sent me to meet. It turned to face us. I'd seen the footage. I'd studied the measurements, the thermal imaging, the skeletal structure analysis that the radiologists had managed to compile. But nothing prepared me for the physical presence of it, the way it moved with liquid grace, the way its form seemed to be both solid and somehow uncertain, as if it existed slightly out of phase with normal space. It was tall, easily 7.5 feet. The body was humanoid in basic structure, but elongated, stretched, as if designed for lower gravity. The skin was pale, almost translucent, revealing delicate patterns of what might have been circulatory systems or neural networks beneath the surface. The head was proportionally larger than human, with eyes that were dark and deep and utterly without expression I could read. It raised one hand, 6 fingers I counted long and articulated, in what might have been greeting or warning or simple acknowledgement. I raised my hand in return. And in that moment, standing at the bottom of the world in a chamber that shouldn't exist, I understood that everything I thought I knew about isolation and communication and the limits of human understanding was about to change. Torres whispered into his comm. "Surface, we have visual confirmation. Subject is non-hostile. Dr. Wolf is initiating contact protocol." The being tilted its head slightly as if listening. Then it spoke. The sound wasn't language. Not in any sense I understood language. It was layered, harmonic, like multiple voices, speaking in precise synchronization, but at different pitches. My translator tablet lit up with cascading symbols, struggling to find patterns in the acoustic data. Then, impossibly, words formed in my headset. English words, slightly accented, as if spoken by someone who'd learned the language from radio broadcasts. Dr. Abraham Wolf, McMurdo Station, medical officer. Born April 12, 1948, Portland, Oregon. Daughter Emily, age 7, currently residing Seattle, Washington. My blood went cold. Torres and Kim had weapons drawn instantly. I raised my hand. "Stop. How do you know that?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. The being moved closer. Each step was deliberate, measured. In the bioluminescent light, I could see details I'd missed in the footage, what looked like geometric patterns etched into its skin, symbols that might have been writing or circuitry or something that served both functions. "All broadcasts," it said. "All signals. We listen. We learn, we remember." The translator showed me waveform analysis. The being wasn't using vocal cords in the traditional sense, but rather manipulating air pressure with extreme precision, creating sounds that mimicked human speech. "How long have you been listening?" I asked. "Since your species discovered electricity, since you began filling silence with noise." I did the math quickly. Over a century. 100 years of radio signals, television broadcasts, military communications, all of it traveling out into space at the speed of light, but also down, absorbed by this intelligence buried beneath the ice. "What are you?" The question felt inadequate, even as I asked it. The being paused. Its dark eyes studied me with an intensity that made me feel simultaneously visible and insignificant. Observer, witness, survivor. Survivor of what? It turned away, moving toward the control panel it had been standing near when we arrived. The surface was covered in symbols that shifted and rearranged themselves, a living interface responding to proximity or thought or some form of interaction I couldn't perceive. "Our vessel came here 47,000 years ago," it said, "during your planet's last glacial maximum. We were 3. Now I am 1. The weight of that statement settled over me. 47,000 years alone. The entirety of recorded human history was a brief moment in that span of isolation. The others died. The cold came faster than we anticipated. Our technology could not compensate. They chose suspension, hoping for rescue. Rescue never came. It touched the panel with those long fingers. I chose to remain conscious, to watch, to wait. Torres spoke quietly in my headset. Washington wants to know if it's a threat. I ignored him. What were you observing? Everything. The rise of your species from tribal hunter-gatherers, the development of agriculture, writing, metallurgy, the wars. Always the wars. It turned back to me. And then, recently, the weapons. The ones that could end everything. The nuclear coordinates, I said. You've been monitoring our military installations. I have been trying to understand why a species would create weapons designed to destroy its own habitat. It is illogical, suicidal. There was no judgment in its voice, only genuine confusion. I thought about Emily, about the world I was leaving her, about the Cold War paranoia that had turned two superpowers into circling predators. We call it deterrence, I said. The idea that the threat of mutual destruction prevents war. Does it? I didn't have an answer. The being moved closer again. I could smell something now, ozone, maybe, or the particular scent of ionized air. Its presence carried a charge, a subtle electromagnetic field that made the hair on my arm stand up even through the biocontainment suit. I have listened to your broadcasts, Dr. Wolf. Music, stories, scientific discussions. I have heard children laughing and lovers arguing and old people remembering wars they survived. I have heard the best and worst of what you're capable of being. And what have you concluded? It was silent for a long moment. The bioluminescent walls pulsed in slow rhythm. Somewhere in the distance I heard the sound of water dripping, ice melting in this impossible warm pocket beneath the glacier. You are young, it finally said. Young and brilliant and terrified. You build beautiful things and terrible things, and you do not yet understand the difference. Can you help us understand? That is not my purpose. Then what is your purpose? The being raised both hands, palms up, a gesture that felt almost human in its helplessness. I am a historian of a dead civilization, recording the rise of a new one. I am an echo in the dark, cataloging signals that were never meant for me. I am the last of my kind, bearing witness to the first of yours. Torres was getting insistent in my headset. Dr. Wolf, we need definitive information. Is it hostile? Does it pose a threat to national security? I looked at this ancient being, the survivor who had endured 47 millennia alone in the dark, listening to humanity's baby steps toward consciousness and self-destruction. I thought about what Mitchell had said, that we couldn't just leave it alone, that we needed to know what it wanted. But standing there, I realized we were asking the wrong questions. It's not a threat, I said into my comm. It's a mirror. Explain, Mitchell's voice crackled through. It doesn't want anything from us. It's just watching, trying to understand if we're going to make it or destroy ourselves. The being nodded slowly. Yes, that is the question I have been asking for 47,000 years, and now perhaps I will live long enough to see the answer. The debriefing lasted 6 hours. Mitchell's team recorded every detail, the being's physical characteristics, its communication patterns, the stunning admission about monitoring human activity for over a century. The linguists were ecstatic. The military intelligence officers looked like they wanted to either dissect it or bury it deeper. I sat in the command tent drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, trying to explain what couldn't be adequately explained. It's not a threat in any conventional sense, I said for the third time. It has no agenda beyond observation. It's not gathering intelligence for an invasion force. It's alone, the last of its species. Colonel Bradford, who'd flown in from Washington overnight, wasn't convinced. It has intimate knowledge of our most sensitive military installations. It's been eavesdropping on classified communications for decades. How is that not a security threat? Because it's not acting on that information, I countered. It's not transmitting data. It's not interfering with our operations. It's just listening. That we know of, Bradford said. Mitchell intervened. Dr. Wolf, you spent 40 minutes in direct contact. What's your medical assessment? Is it capable of aggression? I thought about those dark eyes, the way the being had moved with such deliberate care, the profound loneliness I'd sensed beneath its alien composure. Anything is capable of aggression if sufficiently threatened, I said carefully. But I don't believe violence is its default response. I think it's genuinely trying to understand us. Why? To what end? Maybe just to have understood something before it dies. Maybe that's enough. The room went quiet. Torres broke the silence. Sir, if I may, the being showed no hostile intent during contact, no threatening gestures, no attempt to touch Dr. Wolf or access his equipment. It maintained respectful distance and responded to all communication attempts. Kim nodded agreement. It could have harmed us easily. That chamber is its environment. We're visitors operating under constraints it doesn't have, but it chose dialogue over confrontation. Bradford wasn't satisfied. I need recommendations. What do we do with it? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Mitchell looked at me. Doctor? I set down my coffee cup. We have several options. First, continued monitored contact. I establish a regular communication protocol. We learn what we can. We build a knowledge base that might benefit both species. Second option, Bradford asked. Containment. We seal the chamber, maintain surveillance, ensure it can't leave or communicate beyond the ice. Essentially, we imprison it for the rest of its natural life, which could be unknown. Based on its account, it's already survived 47,000 years. It might outlive human civilization. The implications of that settled over the room like fresh snow. Third option? Mitchell prompted. I hesitated. This was the option that had been forming in my mind since the moment I'd heard the being speak, since I'd recognized the existential loneliness in its voice. We offer to end its isolation. We bring it to the surface, allow it to interact with our world directly, under controlled conditions, give it the opportunity to see what it's been listening to all these years. Bradford laughed, harsh, humorless. You want to bring an unknown alien entity to the surface? Expose it to our population? Release it into our biosphere? I want to offer it a choice, I said quietly. The same choice we'd want if our positions were reversed. Dwarf. Our positions aren't reversed, Doctor. We're the dominant species on this planet. We make the decisions about what happens in our territory. I felt anger rising, sharp, clean, righteous. It was here first, by 47,000 years. If anything, we're the intruders. It's not human, Bradford said flatly. It doesn't have rights under our laws. Then maybe our laws are inadequate. The room erupted. Military officers argued jurisdiction. Scientists debated research protocols. Intelligence analysts calculated threat scenarios. I sat in the center of the storm, thinking about Emily and the world she'd inherit. A world where we'd have to decide what we owed to intelligence that wasn't our own, to consciousness that had evolved under alien stars. Mitchell called for order. When the room settled, he addressed me directly. You've had more contact with it than anyone. If we pursue continued communication, what do you need? Autonomy, I said immediately. No military interference during contact sessions. I established the protocols. I determined the pace of interaction. You monitor remotely, but you don't intervene unless I request support. That's a significant amount of trust to place in one person, Bradford observed. Then place it in the right person, Torres interjected. Dr. Wolf has 17 years in extreme environment medicine. He's psychologically stable, ethically sound, and the being has already demonstrated willingness to communicate with him. You won't find a better candidate for this assignment. Mitchell studied me with those hard, tired eyes. If we approve this, you're committing to long-term contact, potentially months of regular communication sessions. It means extending your tour, living at the drill site, accepting quarantine protocols that will separate you from all normal station activities. I thought about McMurdo, about my quarters and my routine and the comfortable isolation I'd built around myself. I thought about the letters to Emily that I still hadn't sent, about the promise I'd made that this would be my last tour. Then I thought about the being, alone in its chamber of stone and ice, listening to the sounds of a world it could never touch. I accept, I said. Bradford stood abruptly. I'm filing a formal objection. This is a containment situation, not a first contact scenario. We don't negotiate with potential security threats. Noted, Mitchell said, but overruled. Dr. Wolf, you have authorization to proceed with monitored contact protocols. Report all findings directly to me. Session frequency at your discretion, but minimum twice weekly for data collection purposes. Understood. As the room cleared, Torres approached me quietly. You did the right thing, Doc. Whatever it is down there, it deserves better than to die alone in the dark. I wished I felt as certain as he sounded. The being told me its name on our fourth contact session. I'd been descending into the chamber every other day, spending 2 to 3 hours in careful dialogue. We'd established a rhythm. I would arrive, activate the recording equipment, and wait. The being would emerge from deeper in the structure, moving through corridors I hadn't yet explored, and position itself near the control panel that seemed to be its preferred location. The conversations were unlike anything I'd experienced. The being didn't think linearly. Its responses came in spirals, circling topics from multiple angles simultaneously. It would answer a question I'd asked 3 sessions ago in the middle of discussing something else entirely, as if time was something it perceived differently than humans did. Do you have a name? I'd asked during that 4th session. It had paused. The particular stillness that I'd learned meant it was searching for appropriate translation. In my language, the designation translates approximately to the one who remains, but you may use a simpler form if it helps facilitate communication. What would you prefer? Your species names things to claim them, to establish familiarity, to reduce fear. It tilted its head. I have listened to your naming conventions. I understand that names often carry meaning from your history, your literature, your hopes. That's true. Then call me Lazarus. I have died and returned. I have witnessed endings and waited for new beginnings. It seems appropriate. I wrote it in my notebook. Lazarus. The name carried weight, biblical resurrection, impossible survival, the miracle of continuation against all odds. Lazarus, I repeated. Thank you for trusting me with that. Trust is a concept I'm learning to understand again. I had forgotten what it means to have someone to trust. Over the following weeks, Lazarus began sharing its history, fragments at first, then more complete narratives. Its species had been explorers, scientists, driven by curiosity that burned across millennia. They'd mapped their galaxy, cataloged thousands of worlds, documented the rise and fall of civilizations that humans would never know existed. We were not conquerors, Lazarus explained. We did not interfere. We observed, we learned, we preserved knowledge against the entropy of time. Like historians, I said. Yes, though your historians record the past. We attempted to record everything, past, present, and the probability curves of future. We sought to understand the patterns that govern how consciousness emerges, thrives, and ultimately fails. Did you find those patterns? Lazarus made a sound that might have been laughter or grief. We found that consciousness is simultaneously inevitable and fragile. It emerges wherever conditions permit, a mathematical certainty given sufficient time and space, but it also destroys itself with remarkable consistency. How? By creating power it cannot control, by developing technology faster than wisdom, by dividing into factions that value ideology over survival. It paused. By building weapons that can unmake worlds and convincing themselves that such weapons ensure peace. I thought about the coordinates it had broadcast, all those nuclear sites scattered across the globe like loaded guns pressed against humanity's collective temple. You think we're going to destroy ourselves, I said quietly. I think you're at the threshold. The moment where intelligence either matures into wisdom or collapses into extinction. I have seen it 47 times on 47 worlds. Sometimes they survive the transition. Often they do not. What makes the difference? The survivors learn to recognize their own reflection. They see themselves clearly, their brilliance and their brutality, their capacity for creation and destruction. They choose which aspects to nurture and which to transcend. And the others? The others convince themselves that their enemies are the problem, that victory is possible, that their particular ideology justifies any cost. Lazarus moved to the panel, touched it with those long fingers. The symbols rearranged themselves into patterns I couldn't read. They die righteous and certain, never understanding that the true enemy was always within. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling the weight of 47 civilizations lost to the same failure of wisdom. Why tell me this? I finally asked. What do you want me to do with this knowledge? I do not want anything, Dr. Wolf. I am simply answering your questions honestly. You asked what I have learned from observing your species. This is what I have learned. But you must have some hope for us. Otherwise, why keep watching? Lazarus turned to face me fully. In the bioluminescent light, its translucent skin seemed to glow from within. I keep watching because I do not know what else to do. I am a historian without a civilization to return to, recording data for an archive that will never be read. But perhaps, it paused, perhaps bearing witness is enough. Perhaps by watching I honor the memory of my people and acknowledge the potential of yours. I felt something shift in my understanding then. Lazarus wasn't a threat to be contained or a resource to be exploited. It was a mirror being held up to humanity's reflection, and what we chose to see in that mirror would determine what we became. Your military leaders are afraid of me, Lazarus said. They wonder if I am a weapon, a spy, a precursor to invasion. They cannot conceive of a being that simply observes without agenda. They're afraid because they don't understand your purpose. My purpose is to remember, to bear witness to the brief flowering of consciousness wherever it emerges, to honor both the beauty and the tragedy of beings who achieve awareness only to struggle against their own nature. That sounds lonely, I said. It is the loneliest thing I can imagine, but it is also sacred. Every consciousness that emerges in this universe is a small miracle, a temporary victory against entropy. Even if that consciousness ultimately fails, it deserves to be remembered. It deserves to have mattered. I wrote those words in my notebook, my hand trembling slightly. It deserves to have mattered. Lazarus, I said carefully, what happens if humanity doesn't survive this threshold? Then I will remember that you existed, that for a brief moment on this small world, a species of clever primates looked up at the stars and wondered what else was out there. I will remember your music and your mathematics, your poetry and your physics. I will remember that you were beautiful and broken and brave. And standing there, 3 kilometers beneath the ice, I understood the true weight of what we'd found. Not a threat, not a resource, but a witness who would remember us long after we were gone. And that made it the most important discovery in human history. The political situation deteriorated rapidly after word reached Washington. Mitchell had managed to contain information about Lazarus for 3 weeks, limiting knowledge to essential personnel and maintaining radio silence beyond encrypted channels. But secrets that profound can't stay buried. Not when they involve extraterrestrial intelligence, Cold War paranoia, and the potential restructuring of everything humanity understood about its place in the universe. The leak came from inside our own operation. Someone, Mitchell never discovered who, transmitted data to a journalist at the Washington Post. The story ran on March 15, 1987, under the headline, Alien Life Discovered in Antarctica, Military Covers Up First Contact. Within 48 hours, the drill site transformed from a research outpost into a media battlefield. Helicopters circled the restricted airspace. Journalists with telephoto lenses camped at the edge of the exclusion zone. The Navy deployed additional security to establish a 3-kilometer perimeter, but the damage was done. The world knew something impossible had been found beneath the ice, and they demanded answers. The scientific community erupted. NASA issued a statement. The Soviet Union demanded access under Antarctic treaty provisions. The United Nations convened an emergency session. Religious leaders offered theological interpretations. Conspiracy theorists claimed vindication. And in the middle of the chaos, Lazarus waited in its chamber of stone, listening to humanity's reaction to its existence. Mitchell called me to the command tent on March 18th. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days, eyes bloodshot, uniform wrinkled, hands shaking slightly from too much coffee and too little sleep. Washington wants to weaponize it, he said without preamble. The Joint Chiefs are arguing that any entity with knowledge of our nuclear deployment represents a strategic asset that must be controlled. Controlled how? Extraction, full containment, study under military supervision at an undisclosed location. He pulled out a folder. They're proposing transfer within 72 hours. I felt ice in my veins. That's not extraction, that's kidnapping. The legal team argues it doesn't qualify as kidnapping since the subject isn't human and has no recognized legal status. Jesus Christ, Mitchell. We're talking about a conscious, intelligent being that's been trying to help us understand ourselves, and we're going to repay that by imprisoning it? I don't make the policy, Abraham. I just implement it. Then implement better policy. I stood, pacing the tent. Has anyone asked Lazarus what it wants? Has anyone considered that it might have preferences about its own existence? It's an alien intelligence on American-controlled territory. Its preferences are secondary to national security. I stared at him. Listen to yourself. You sound exactly like the people Lazarus has been warning me about. The ones who choose power over wisdom, control over cooperation. Mitchell's expression hardened. This isn't philosophy, Doctor. This is real-world decision-making about an unprecedented situation. We have responsibility to the American people to secure any potential threat. Lazarus isn't a threat. You don't know that. None of us do. It's been feeding us information for weeks, building trust, possibly manipulating us towards some objective we can't perceive. Or maybe it's just what it claims to be, an observer trying to understand if we're worth surviving. Before Mitchell could respond, Torres entered the tent. Sir, we have a situation. Multiple international vessels approaching our territorial waters. Russian, Chinese, British. They're demanding access to the discovery site under Antarctic treaty provisions. Mitchell cursed quietly. How long until they reach the exclusion zone? 18 hours, maybe less, if they push through the ice. The political dimensions were accelerating beyond control. Every major power wanted access to Lazarus, some for scientific purposes, others for military advantage, all of them driven by fear that someone else might gain exclusive knowledge of extraterrestrial technology or intelligence. There's more, Torres continued. A delegation from the Vatican is en route, and the UN Secretary General is demanding a multinational scientific team be granted immediate access. Mitchell looked at me. You're the only person who's established communication with it. I need recommendations. How do we handle this? I thought about Lazarus, alone in its chamber, probably listening to the radio chatter and understanding exactly what was happening. 47,000 years of patient observation, and humanity's first response was territorial competition and power struggle. We ask Lazarus, I said. We explain the situation honestly and let it decide what happens next. That's not an option. Oh, why not? Because we're afraid it might choose differently than we want? Because acknowledging its agency threatens our assumption of dominance? Mitchell stood, facing me directly. Because the moment we give it choice, we lose control of the situation entirely. And I cannot, will not, allow an unknown intelligence to dictate terms that affect global security. Then you're proving everything Lazarus has been saying about us. We're a young species that builds weapons we can't control, creates problems we can't solve, and responds to the unknown with fear instead of wisdom. Better fearful and alive than trusting and extinct. The argument was interrupted by a technician rushing into the tent. Sir, the subject is broadcasting. It's using the seismic array as a transmission medium. The signal is being detected by monitoring stations globally. Mitchell went pale. What's it transmitting? The technician played the audio. It was Lazarus's voice, translated through the same technology that had allowed our communication, but amplified through the very structure of the Antarctic ice sheet. To all who listen, I am Lazarus, last survivor of a civilization that once mapped the stars. I have been observing your species for 112 years. I have watched you create wonders and terrors, achieve greatness and inflict suffering. You stand now at a threshold, the moment where intelligence either matures into wisdom or collapses into extinction. The choice is yours. I offer no judgment, only witness. Know that you are seen. Know that you will be remembered. Choose wisely. The broadcast ended. Mitchell stared at the equipment, comprehending immediately what had just happened. Lazarus had bypassed all containment protocols, all government control, all attempts at managed disclosure. It had spoken directly to the world. Lock down the chamber, Mitchell ordered. Full security protocols. No one goes down without my explicit authorization. Sir, I started. That's an order, Dr. Wolf. As of this moment, you're relieved of contact duty pending review. Torres moved to escort me out. I looked back at Mitchell, seeing a good man making decisions from fear, doing exactly what Lazarus had predicted we would do. You're making a mistake, I said. I'm protecting my country, Mitchell replied. Outside the tent, the Antarctic wind howled across the ice, indifferent to human politics and alien wisdom and the choice we were failing to make. I spent the next 48 hours in forcible separation from the chamber, confined to my quarters under what Mitchell euphemistically called protective observation. Torres brought me meals and updates, both delivered with the quiet apology of a soldier following orders he didn't agree with. The world was in chaos. Lazarus's broadcast had been heard on every continent. Religious leaders called it divine revelation. Scientists demanded access. Governments argued jurisdiction. And beneath all the noise was the simple, terrifying question, what did humanity do when confronted with intelligence that could judge us? On the third day of my confinement, Torres arrived with news that changed everything. Mitchell's been recalled to Washington, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. A new command structure arrives tomorrow. Special operations team with authorization to extract the subject by any means necessary. They're going to take Lazarus by force? And that's the read I'm getting. Full containment, immediate transfer. No consultation with the subject or existing contact personnel. He sat down heavily. Doc, I've been in the military 22 years. I've followed orders that made me uncomfortable, but this feels wrong. What are you saying? Torres met my eyes. I'm saying I have sentry duty tonight on the elevator shaft. I'm saying I might experience a sudden onset of severe gastrointestinal distress around 200 hours that requires me to temporarily abandon my post. I'm saying that someone with medical authorization could potentially override the security lockout during that 15-minute window. I understood immediately. Torres, they'll court-martial you. Probably. But I didn't sign up to betray the first alien intelligence humanity's ever encountered. Some things matter more than career advancement. He stood. Your call, Doc. But if you're going to do something, tonight's your only opportunity. After he left, I sat in my quarters thinking about choices and consequences, about Emily and the world I wanted her to inherit. I thought about Lazarus, trapped not by ice, but by human fear, about to be extracted like a specimen for study rather than honored as the conscious being it was. I thought about what I would want someone to do if our positions were reversed. At 01:45 hours, I gathered my medical kit and notebook. At 0200, Torres clutched his stomach convincingly and staggered toward the latrine. At 0203, I used my medical override code to access the elevator shaft. The descent took 37 minutes, the same as always, but it felt longer knowing I was committing what amounted to treason. The military would call it unauthorized contact with an alien entity. I called it keeping faith with consciousness. Lazarus was waiting when the elevator doors opened. Dr. Wolf, it said, I calculated there was a 73% probability you would attempt this communication, despite orders to the contrary. I'm pleased my assessment was accurate. They're going to extract you tomorrow, I said without preamble. Take you from here, study you in some facility where you'll never see light or sky or anything beyond laboratory walls. I came to warn you and to apologize. You need not apologize for actions you did not take. I should have fought harder, argued better, found some way to protect you from this. Lazarus moved closer. You have protected me, Dr. Wolf. Not from extraction. That was always inevitable once my existence became public. But from loneliness. For 47,000 years I've been alone. And then you came, asking questions not from fear, but from genuine curiosity. You saw me not as a threat to be neutralized, but as a consciousness worthy of dialogue. That gift is beyond measure. I felt tears burning behind my eyes. What will you do? I will go with them. Allow them to study me. Answer their questions as honestly as I am able. Perhaps in that process, they will learn something valuable about themselves. They might hurt you. I survived 47 millennia beneath ice. I can survive human fear for however long I have remaining. How long is that? Lazarus made that sound again. The one that might have been laughter. My species was designed for deep time. Barring violence, I could theoretically survive another 100,000 years, though whether I would want to is another question entirely. I sat down on the cold stone floor, suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to make this right. You cannot. The situation transcends individual action, but you can bear witness, as I have borne witness. You can remember this moment, the choice your species faces, the path they select, and perhaps eventually you can share that memory in ways that influence future choices. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that consciousness met consciousness beneath the ice. That fear won the first encounter, but wisdom might yet claim the long game. Tell them that being observed changes the observer. That I am different for having known you, just as you are different for having known me. I pulled out my notebook. What do you want humanity to know? If I could tell them one thing from you, what would it be? Lazarus was silent for a long moment. The bioluminescent walls pulsed their slow rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, ice shifted with the patience of geological time. Tell them that they are not alone in the universe. Tell them that consciousness is both common and precious, emerging wherever conditions permit, flowering briefly against the dark. Tell them that their choice to nurture or destroy that consciousness matters, even if no one is watching. Tell them that I have watched, and I have hoped, and I believe they are capable of becoming something extraordinary if they can learn to see themselves clearly. I wrote every word, my handwriting shaking slightly in the cold. "And Dr. Wolf," Lazarus added quietly, "tell your daughter that the being beneath the ice asked about her, that I have heard her laughter in the recordings of your letters, that she is part of what convinced me humanity is worth hoping for." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. At 03:15, Torres radioed that the Special Operations team had arrived early, 4 hours ahead of schedule. I had minutes, maybe seconds, before they discovered my absence and locked down the site. "I have to go," I said. "I know. Go carefully, Dr. Wolf, and live well. Live in ways that honor the dialogue we have shared." I stood, gathered my equipment. At the elevator door, I turned back one last time. Lazarus raised one hand, 6 fingers spread wide, in a gesture that transcended language. I raised mine in return. Then the doors closed, and I began the long ascent back to the surface, carrying with me the weight of witness and the hope that somehow, someday, humanity would prove worthy of the being we'd found beneath the ice. They arrested me at the surface. Mitchell's replacement, a colonel whose name I never learned, had me placed in military custody pending investigation into unauthorized contact with a classified subject. Torres was arrested too, though he never admitted his role. He took the full blame, saying he'd fallen asleep at his post and I'd exploited a security lapse. The extraction happened at 800 hours. I watched from my detention tent as they lowered specialized containment equipment into the shaft, hermetically sealed transport module, environmental controls, enough sedation to drop an elephant. I wondered if they'd even try to communicate with Lazarus first, or if they'd simply treat it as a specimen to be collected. I never found out. 2 days later, I was flown off the continent under military escort, debriefed for 72 hours at a facility I couldn't identify, and released with a non-disclosure agreement that carried criminal penalties for violation. They let me go home to Seattle. Emily was 8 years old, bright and curious and full of questions I couldn't answer. I held her close and promised myself I would find a way to tell her the truth someday. When she was old enough to understand, when the classification restrictions expired, when the world was ready to know what had really happened beneath the ice. I returned to civilian medical practice, working at a community clinic in Portland. My ex-wife and I reached a custody arrangement. Life resumed its normal patterns: breakfast, work, Emily's soccer games, holidays, aging. But I never stopped thinking about Lazarus. I followed the news obsessively, looking for hints of what had happened. There were occasional reports, strange signals detected from classified facilities, unnamed scientists speaking in vague terms about biological anomalies, cryptic references in declassified documents that surfaced decades later, but nothing conclusive. Nothing that proved Lazarus had survived or suffered or shared its wisdom with those who held it captive. I wrote letters to congressional committees, to scientific journals, to anyone who might have oversight or influence. Most went unanswered. The ones that received responses all said the same thing: your claims cannot be verified. The matter is classified. No further information is available. Torres sent me a postcard once, 15 years later. It showed the Antarctic ice shelf at sunset, beautiful and remote. On the back, in his careful handwriting, he'd written only, "Some choices echo longer than we expect. No regrets." I kept that postcard in my notebook, next to the transcript of my final conversation with Lazarus. Emily grew up. She went to college, studied environmental science, married a good man who made her laugh. She had children of her own, my grandchildren, who I taught to look at the stars and wonder what else might be out there watching. I retired at 70, moved to a cabin in the Cascade Mountains. From my porch, I could see forests that reminded me of the places Lazarus had listened to all those years, the quiet spaces where intelligence met wilderness, where human noise faded into the deeper rhythms of living systems. On my 80th birthday, Emily visited with my grandchildren. We sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, and I told them a story. I told them about the Antarctic, about the ice and the isolation and the strange responsibility of being the first human to speak with intelligence from beyond Earth. I told them about Lazarus, its loneliness and wisdom, its hope and its warnings. I told them about the choice humanity faced, the threshold we were still navigating between maturity and extinction. "Did we make the right choice?" my oldest grandchild asked. She was 12, the age where children start understanding that adults don't have all the answers. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We're still making it. Every day we choose fear or wisdom, control or cooperation, isolation or connection. The story isn't finished yet. Do you think it's still alive? The being from the ice?" I looked up at the stars. Thousands of them, millions, each one potentially warming worlds where consciousness had emerged and flourished or failed. I think if it is, it's still watching, still hoping we'll choose to become something extraordinary. Do you think we will? I thought about everything I'd witnessed in my 80 years, the wars and the peace treaties, the environmental destruction and the conservation efforts, the hatred and the love, the fear and the courage. I thought about Emily growing from a child to a mother, to a grandmother herself, about the unbroken chain of consciousness passing knowledge and hope forward through generations. "I think we're trying," I said. "And maybe that's enough. Maybe the attempt matters as much as the outcome." That night, after Emily and the children left, I sat on my porch and wrote one final entry in the notebook I'd carried for 5 decades. I wrote about memory and witness, about the sacred responsibility of bearing testimony to what we've encountered and who we might become. I wrote about how Lazarus had honored humanity by watching us, hoping for us, believing we were capable of wisdom despite all evidence to the contrary. And I wondered if somewhere, in a facility deep underground, or in a freedom finally granted, or in whatever existence consciousness assumes after biological life ends, Lazarus was still listening, still cataloging our progress, still holding space for the possibility that we might yet mature past our fear. The stars turned overhead, indifferent and eternal, and I understood finally what Lazarus had been trying to teach me all along, that being seen, truly seen, with all our flaws and potential acknowledged, was not a judgment but a gift. That having someone bear witness to our existence, someone who would remember us clearly and honestly, was perhaps the greatest kindness one consciousness could offer another. Some secrets of the ice aren't buried forever. They're entrusted to those who listen. There are still places in this world where the impossible waits beneath layers of time and ice and human assumption, where consciousness reaches across gulfs of evolutionary divergence, seeking connection, understanding, recognition, where the question isn't whether we're alone in the universe, but whether we're wise enough to honor what we find when we look. Lazarus taught me that observation is an act of love, that to truly see another being, to witness its existence without trying to possess or control it, is to honor the miracle of consciousness wherever it emerges. And perhaps that's the real test we face as a species, not whether we can find intelligence beyond Earth, but whether we can recognize it, respect it, and learn from it when it appears. The choice is still ours. The witness is still watching. And the ice, patient and ancient, still keeps its secrets, until we're ready to receive them with wisdom instead of fear. Some truths aren't discovered. They're earned through the courage to listen, the humility to learn, and the wisdom to change. If you believe consciousness deserves to be honored wherever it emerges, if you believe humanity is capable of choosing wisdom over fear, then share this story. Let it be a reminder that we're still being observed, still being given opportunities to prove what we're capable of becoming. Subscribe to continue exploring the stories that challenge us to see ourselves clearly, where the impossible becomes real and humanity is put to the test, because some witnesses never stop watching, and some choices echo across millennia.